Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Ajrud. I'm the Chief of Party for the Sustainable Wash Systems Learning Partnership, or SWS. Welcome to day 2 of our Closeout event and learning series. Today we'll be discussing tools and methods to better map, assess, and engage with wash systems and local actor networks, as well as sharing some of our key findings from applying these tools. Before we start, I'll do a quick run through of some of the BlueJeans features we'll be using today. This will be mostly a refresher for those who attended our event launch, but I do want to make sure that those joining for the first time are comfortable with the platform. Okay, so this event is being recorded and we will be sharing the link to the recording in a weekly recap email this Friday. As a reminder, all participants are automatically muted and your cameras are switched off, so you will not be visible in the recording unless you elect to by raising your hand, and I will share a little bit more about that in a moment. If at any point you are experiencing issues with the BlueJeans platform, please let our tech team know via the moderator chat. And if you want to, I think we're a little bit out of order, you could back up. Yeah, great. And if you want to make either the speaker video or the presentation larger, you can adjust this at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions using the Q&A box. We will be collecting these to ask our speakers and also have some dedicated SWS partners who will be responding to your questions directly in the Q&A box. If you are just joining us, please introduce yourself in the event chat and continue to use this feature to interact with other attendees throughout today's session. We do have a few norms for virtual engagement that we want you to consider. First, we recommend placing devices out of reach and closing other windows on your computer to avoid distraction. Second, we would love to see an active dialogue in the chat box. A couple of shortcuts we are recommending are a +1 to indicate agreement, an @ sign to build off of a comment, and a negative sign to indicate you have a different perspective. And you can also feel free to use emojis to communicate with each other. A new feature we'll be using today is Raise Your Hand, which allows you to interact live with our presenters. Click on the hand icon if you would like to become unmuted to ask a question or share a reflection, and we'll be using this for the second part of today's session. Okay, so this is the first of 3 deep dives on SWS priority learning topics. We also have sessions on professionalized maintenance and collective action next week. And then as well as our final session where we will tie everything together. You should have received a Tap into SWS Learning email yesterday that included a short video on social network analysis and an interactive dashboard on assessing stakeholder understanding. If you did not receive this email and would like to be added to our list, please let us know in the moderator chat. We will be sending a weekly recap on Friday with links to presentations and recordings for this week's sessions, additional resources on the topics that were covered, and an FAQ section where we will be answering some of your burning questions. For today's agenda, we'll start with an introduction to the topic, including a discussion of some of the tools and methods SWS used to improve understanding of wash systems. We'll then discuss some of our key findings, and we hope to engage all of you in this discussion with some live polling, and have also invited some experts to reflect on these findings. We'll end by sharing a few of our flagship resources on the topic and previewing the next session. You can access biographies for all of today's speakers at a Google site that we created for this event. We'll share the link in the chat now. I would also like to introduce our 3 leads for today's session. Angela Houston is the head of accountability and adaptation at IRC. She supports research and learning for SWS implementing Uganda and Ethiopia. Rich Fromer is the managing director for Link and leads research on social network analysis for the SWS consortium. And finally, Jeff Walters is an assistant professor at the University of Washington Tacoma and leads research on stakeholder understanding for SWS. I will ask all of our presenters to go ahead and turn on your cameras at this time, and we will hear from Jeff first. So over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Brittany. Hello, my name is Jeff Walters. It is my pleasure to introduce this next section where we'll briefly summarize the work that SWS has been doing related to the important topic of systems understanding. Awesome. As you may recall from the opening session on Monday, the SWS Learning Partnership proposed a theory of change that you see here, which states that systems strengthening can be done more effectively once all involved stakeholders have a better understanding of the interconnected factors and actors that influence service sustainability. And the key here is interactions between factors and actors. We were tasked with evaluating if and how systems level understanding was changing during the 5-year SWS project duration, and if this understanding appeared to be leading to the identification of priorities that improve system strengthening efforts towards sustainable water and sanitation services.
Thanks, Jeff, and hello, everyone. My name is Rich Fromer with Link. So the foundation for this work was based on USAID's 5 Rs, which were well laid out in the USAID Local Systems Framework published in 2014. Under SWS, we used a suite of complementary tools to understand the local system, many of which closely involved local stakeholders and actively increased their understanding of the complexity of water and sanitation service sustainability. Among the tools or methods that we applied, you can see on the right of this slide, network analysis, which was used to better understand relationships and dynamics among WASH stakeholders, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment. Stakeholder understanding analysis, which was used to track how those stakeholders' perspectives of the WASH system have shifted over time, and Jeff will introduce that shortly as well. Then there were a variety of scorecards and sector assessments, which were used to measure the status of financial, institutional, environmental, technological, and social components of the system that are expected to influence sustainability. And Angela is going to introduce that in a moment as well. And then you could see here as well, we did outcome mapping, which was used to track progress in influencing the behavior and actions of direct partners on the project. So we'll give a bit more background on these 3 studies now, before getting into a subset of the findings that we've made across the project and some deeper discussion. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So, one moment here. Sorry. So let's talk about network analysis first. We've seen that as the WASH sector shifts to more complexity-aware activities to address sustainability services, it's increasingly important to understand the stakeholders of those services and the relationships or interactions among them. Social network analysis is a powerful tool for analyzing relationships among actors. It offers a way to understand our work in the context of relationships among stakeholders, such as public institutions, NGOs, private enterprise, water use associations, and others. By looking at the flow of information, financial resources, skills, and knowledge transfer, and the partnerships that exist in a network, it provides us insight into the structure, including which stakeholders are most influential, which are least likely to be heard, and how the group functions collectively. So as shown on this slide, the resulting analysis can help practitioners design their interventions, aware of the network strengths and weaknesses, can provide data to be used to monitor and learn from change in the network over time, and it can also be used to spark productive conversations with network members on how to improve their network and the sustainability of their work. Under SWS, we conducted 19 network analyses for 8 different networks in 4 countries. All the networks conducted a baseline analysis, all except for Cambodia conducted an endline analysis, and the 4 Ethiopian networks additionally conducted a midterm network analysis. In addition to the valuable information that those analyses provided directly to field teams working within each network or with each network, the SWS team reviewed and compared the methodologies, results, and uses across all 19 network analyses to identify the most effective ways to conduct an SNA, how to adapt SNA to different contexts and needs, and to provide recommendations for WASH practitioners or users seeking to understand stakeholder relationships. There's a lot more information on network analysis available on globalwaters.org, including our recently published flagship report using social network analysis in WASH programs, which we just put a link to in the chat.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. And thanks, Rich and Brittany. With the support of in-country partners, we conducted a multi-year study to evaluate the key assumption of the SWS theory of change you saw before, which states that an increased likelihood of sustainable service delivery begins with an improvement in how stakeholders understand local system interactions. We did this through a systematic evaluation of how local stakeholders conceptualize the interactions of factors that influence service sustainability, and how this understanding appeared to have shifted over time while engaging in the various SWS systems approaches. This task entailed interviewing water and sanitation stakeholders, including government officials, NGOs, water users, at different points in time, where we asked them questions related to the challenges and solutions to sustainable service delivery. Transcribed interviews were analyzed to pull out causal statements, such as the one you see here, to rigorously piece together an assessment for how regional stakeholders understood factor interactions. Over the duration of this study across 7 regions within Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya, we interviewed over 200 stakeholders, analyzed over 1,000 pages of transcribed interviews, and pulled out nearly 4,000 causal statements containing over 2,000 unique factor interactions. Suffice to say, it was a ton of work, but it revealed some interesting shifts in how stakeholders understood their local system context in these different settings. We're excited to present some findings from this study later on in the session, but you may have already seen some of these results in the Stakeholder Understanding Dashboard shared on Monday by Nick Valcourt. We'll post a link to this dashboard in the chat. We'll also have a flagship report for this work that we'll present as well, or that we'll give you a link to later.
Hello, I'm Angela Houston. So another tool that we used in the Sustainable Wash Systems Learning Partnership, I've seen several of you mention in the chat, which is something we called a building block assessment. So at high level, the building blocks on the right-hand side here define all the key functions of water, sanitation, and hygiene service delivery systems. So these building blocks can be seen as different windows or lenses for looking at the system. So in an assessment, each of these are analyzed against a set of benchmarks. You see an example here on the left-hand side on a scale of 1 to 5 through a dialogue with different stakeholders that piece together different sources of information, policy review, meeting notes, sector reports. And this approach is helpful because it brings together knowledge and information from all sorts of different other analyses available. And then it also allows filling in kind of gaps in documentation with the knowledge of the experts who participate in the assessment. So there are other similar sector scorecards or similar types of assessment in use by other stakeholders in the WASH sector and beyond, and even throughout this project. Slide, please. So now that we've introduced a few of the tools that were used to study and understand local systems, we'll move into the next section of our program for today, where we'll share and discuss some key findings from having applied these tools over the past several years. Slide. So please be ready to be involved. You see interactive at the top, so if you're not looking at the screen or multitasking, maybe it's a good time to chime in. We're going to use a format which is a modified version of what's known as the fishbowl discussion, but it's adapted to make it work in this online format, we hope. So this is how it works. We'll have 3 rounds of discussion, each focused on one key finding from the research on understanding systems. First, we'll do an audience poll to get your thinking about this topic. Then we will present a key finding from the research, followed by, represented by the orange boxes here, a discussion among experts, including some of you fellow participants. So this is where the interactive gets, again, important. So both the expert discussions who've been invited for today and myself and our moderation team will be watching the chat and poll responses to bring into the discussion. But you will also have the opportunity to raise your hand. I see lots of members of, for example, the project team online. So if you feel you're an expert and you'd like to bring your perspective to the table and the conversation, time permitting, I may be able to virtually call you up to the stage and hand you the microphone.
So there'll be 3 rounds representing the 3 findings. We go. Slide. So the first round focuses on how our understanding and the understanding of different stakeholders has changed throughout the 5 years of the project. Over to you, Jeff, for the poll.
All right, thanks, Angela. Okay, let's start our discussion on this sort of first finding related to shifts in understanding on factor interactions with a brief poll. To participate, click on the poll icon to the right in BlueJeans. So that's popping up. Great. So hopefully you guys can see this. So the first question asks, which of the following is more likely to lead to a change in stakeholders' understanding of local systems? All right, so there's 2 options. You pick one of these. Dynamic changes to the local context, landscape, or rules, so basically the context itself, or information learning and awareness of the stakeholders themselves, so context or learning by the stakeholders. So I'll give you guys about a minute to fill this out. We have some time. So yeah, just click one of those guys. And let us know if you're having an issue seeing these. I don't see anyone clicking this yet. Are people clicking this yet? Oh, there we go. Outstanding. Very cool. Thanks, everybody. I'll give folks about 15 more seconds. All right, that's great. Cool. So let's close that poll. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so given that there are inevitable shifts in understanding, and we see here that folks generally think, or the majority of folks think that the change in understanding is because stakeholders themselves learn and are more aware of the system. Very cool. The second poll question asks, so how often do you, as practitioners, for example, need to adapt your work plan or program strategies due to shifting stakeholder understanding of the WASH system? So the options you see here in the poll vary from continuously throughout the project, constantly sort of checking in and evaluating, to sort of one time at the start of the project, sort of shifting the project and how it's going one time based on a shift in understanding. So I'll give folks a minute or so to fill out this poll as well. Saying continuously, that's very cool. What are the implications of that on how we do this? It's very interesting. And don't feel pushed to vote for anything. If you think it's at the end of time or at the end of the project, you put it there. Very interesting. Okay, I'll give folks another 10 seconds or so to kind of click which one they think. All right, let's close the poll. Thanks a lot, everybody. Great. So yeah, thanks for participating in these polls. Very interesting. So it appears that folks seem to think that the change in stakeholder understanding sort of results from an awareness or learning from the stakeholders themselves, and that that shifts in this understanding need to be integrated and planned for in the work plan, sort of on a continuous basis. Very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot we can discuss about that in and of itself. So to contrast these findings from the poll, we would like to take a few moments to present some overarching findings from the study on stakeholder understanding that I mentioned earlier, where we sought to evaluate how stakeholders' understanding on factors influencing sustainability of water and sanitation services shifted over time. So the figure here that you see summarizes some high-level results on how stakeholder understanding on 17 cross-case factors that we found were found to change over the 5-year SWS project duration. You can see here the factors range from operations and maintenance, community users, infrastructure. These were sort of cross-case factors. And these emerged from all of our interviews and all of our analyses. This figure shows how frequent each of these factors was referenced within a causal statement, not just how often they were referenced as a factor, but within an actual causal, one factor on influencing another factor state, sort of a causal statement, related to solutions to sustainable water and sanitation service delivery. In this figure, gray diamonds represent interviews conducted at the beginning of the project, sort of baseline data, and dark blue diamonds represent interviews conducted at the end of the project, inline data. And the bar between these diamonds shows the magnitude of shift in reference to these factors within causal statements. Certainly there's a lot to unpack here, a ton. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. However, the high-level theme that we see here is an increased understanding on the link between operations and maintenance, O&M, and service delivery, the importance of increased engagement with the private sector and decreased dependence on community-based management and user support. And these findings point to a clear switch in understanding from hardware-driven approaches towards approaches that emphasize sustainable service provision, many of which were mentioned by our panelists in the session on Monday, including increased government responsibility and engagement with the private sector, and the importance for solid operation and maintenance schemes.
Right, thank you, Jeff, and thanks everyone for the participation in the poll. We'll now get into our fishbowl discussion. So hopefully you've picked up a few ideas you'd like to reflect on or respond to. So we will start by introducing our invited discussants, but you're also welcome to start responding in the chat already, and then we'll either read those out or call you up to the stage. So Patrick, Savata, Cliff, and Lucas, could you please turn on your cameras? And next slide, please. Great. So as our discussants join and get their cameras on, I'll give a brief introduction. So Savata Nu was the Executive Director of Watershed from 2018 to mid-2021 and led the strategic exit of Watershed. Just a note, you can still keep your mics off. I will prompt you to turn those on in a moment. Savata is currently the Country Director of CARE International in Cambodia. Thanks for joining, Savata. Lucas, I hope, has been able to join. We're having some technical difficulties, but Lucas is a water and sanitation advisor for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and is a blogger and strategist dedicated to improving the effectiveness of multi-stakeholder water and sanitation interventions. Cliff Nyaga, who some of you met yesterday, Monday in the session, is a WASH systems researcher with the University of Oxford and the director of Fundifix, a Kenya-based organization that provides rural communities with sustainable water supply infrastructure and repairs. And last but not least, Patrick Moriarty is IRC's Chief Executive Officer. He's held diverse roles throughout his more than 20 years at IRC and enjoys working in the messy interface between policy, applied research, and practice. So thank you to our expert discussions. And the last experts are many of you. So again, I'm encouraging you to step up and contribute. We have a huge research team and many of other experts joining to learn more about SWS today. And we'd love to hear from you. Slide, please. I'm going to read this prompt, and then we will stop sharing the screen to enable you to better see the discussants. So we'll transfer this question into the chat so you can see it there. So as we've seen in the finding just presented by Jeff, our understanding of local systems is constantly evolving, as are our priorities and the priorities of different stakeholders. So the question is, how do we navigate this reality and changing perspectives when planning and managing water, sanitation, and hygiene services? So it's a big question. Feel free to interpret it to your perspective. And I'd like to first ask Cliff, as a researcher and a lot of experience on the service provider side, to give a reply, and then Savata, Lucas, and Patrick. And just a reminder to our distinguished experts, please do try to be as brief as possible in your responses to enable us some back and forth for a discussion. Do remember to unmute your microphone when I pass it over to you. So first, over to you, Cliff.
Thank you. So that's correct. And from working in Kitui, Kenya over the last 3-4 years, we saw a constantly evolving understanding of the local stakeholders while monitoring the local WASH platform which we work through. We were able to recognize this or observe this because we used a number of methodologies continuously to be effectively able to measure and monitor their behaviors and their priorities, their changing priorities. I would, for instance, say that we participated in local meetings, almost everyday meetings. We, in fact, had an officer embedded at the local county government offices to be able to stay in touch or in tabs with the local developments. That included participation in meetings, engagement with new stakeholders coming into work in the county on WASH. We also employed observations. So in various forums, we were invited as a key stakeholder, given that we were generating a big amount of evidence from our SWS research. And so in these meetings, we would observe, we would document discussions. We would also administer surveys at the local WASH forum, which was held quarterly. We had interviews on a semi-annual frequency. We had the network analysis activities as well. So we had a very intensive monitoring framework, and which helped us to stay in touch with the changes in understanding in the sector. So I think I would like to emphasize that, number one, you need to have a very strong monitoring component to be able to stay on top of these changes and see how the actors are behaving or changing their priorities. And in response as well, you need your programming to be able to respond to these changes. Through our work in Kitui and showing various results from our work, from our analysis, so evidence on functionality, on access, on service quality, on the network, we saw priorities shift. And so in response to that, then you need a program that is able to rapidly respond to the emerging changing priorities of local stakeholders. I'll just give an example of the work we did on demonstration of fully fixed model and a county-wide audit of water service quality in schools and communities. And after a series of discussions through the WASH forum, showing the evidence, showing the data, and people debating the consequences or implications of that, then we shifted to a discussion on policy. So the county didn't have a policy framework at all to guide sector progression towards sustainability, which was like the vision of the local stakeholders. So then we were able to, as a stakeholder group through the local coalition, immediately identify that the policy gap was key and needed to be addressed immediately. And luckily, within SWS work, there was that flexibility to be able to respond to policy needs. So as part of strengthening actions. So I would emphasize the need for adaptable programming. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cliff. And it's great to hear the importance of being able to detect or identify changes in priorities and focus and then respond to them. Savata, do you want to add on?
Thank you, Angela. I echo what Cliff was mentioning about having an evolving research, monitoring, evaluation, and research in order to inform the decision and inform the work plan. But I'm going to touch base on the donor part. So my point here is to shout out to the donor when you would like to have an evolving program and without having the understanding donor, so the implementer wouldn't be able to implement this effectively. So having an understanding donor who understands that this is an evolving sector and working on with the actor and the factor is a very critical part that everything gets evolving. So your project proposal or your implementation wouldn't be exactly what you agreed from the beginning. It's not. I heard what Jeff was checking when seeing that there's a continuous changing on the work plan in order to adapt to the evolving situation. And I totally agree that sometimes it's not possible to keep changing because you need something to report, you need something to be clear among all the implementer, government stakeholder, partner, and stuff. So it's not possible to keep changing, but at least every 6 months or every year it has to be changing. So that understanding donor is something that we need to work on, and the communication, transparent communication among all stakeholders have to be very clear. In the case of Cambodia, in water and sanitation or rural sanitation and hygiene working group, we have all the communication through the Google folder where all the information was stored there. However, in the case of Cambodia, it's not that successful that all the information has been shared in a very transparent in a very transparent way. So
great. Thank you very much for that, and bringing us back to saying, stakeholders very closely involved in the activities can identify the need to change and adapt, but there can also be barriers, whether it's from the donor or other factors, which make it challenging to adapt. Lucas, maybe that's a nice time to hand you the mic for your reflections on this as well.
Yes, thank you. I think because I'm working on the donor side, I will try to share our experience in terms of how we have done that. So I think the first starting point is to be very clear that we are working on a very complex setting, and there are things that we know and there are things that we don't know. And this starts from the way we assess the evidence around the intervention we want to achieve. And then that help you to define what is adaptive and what is not adaptive. By understanding the things which we don't know, it means then you will be able to clearly measure and follow how you adapt and justify the change in the process. Now, for the donor side, in Tanzania, for example, what we did is basically to try to create an enabling environment for the change to be able to happen, and for the adaptation to be able to happen. And in our case, we use two things. We use the payment by results approach and adaptive programming. So the payment by result approach actually it creates an incentive and a commitment for stakeholders to work toward a common goal. But in that process, when you define the payment indicator, for example, in our case, is a functioning water point. So you don't prescribe the process. By doing that, it means you allow the implementers, and in this case, district authorities, to innovate in terms of how they want to achieve that outcome. And by using adaptive programming, you are flexible to learn in the process. So this is very different from other traditional programming approach where, as a donor, you come up with a solution and say, this is what I want you to do. But in this case, you say, I have the funding. This is the outcome I want you to achieve. The way you do it, from different processes for how to achieve that process. And then you become a facilitator for that process. That also, it means there are some component of the program which you can set some funding to fulfill some traditional approach for reporting and meeting some KPI. But then you have a large component where you are able to test and adapt it as you go. So for now, I will end there. But you see, it's basically shifting a focus from prescribing too much toward creating an enabling environment for implementers to be able to implement things and learn in the process.
Great, thank you very much, Lucas. And it's really, it's great to hear about some examples of actually ways a donor can use monitoring to create more flexibility and room for adaptation, including adaptive planning, results-based monitoring approaches, as you've mentioned. With that, I want to ask Patrick to add some reflections as well on this perspective of, as you know, the understanding changes over time among different actors in the project. It could be a donor, it could be a government priority shifting or elections happening or other stakeholders. What are some ways to plan long term but be able to still adapt as priority shift or understanding changes?
Sure, thanks, Angela, and everybody. I mean, that's what triggered me most, actually, when I first saw the question is, our understanding is constantly evolving, and I'm like, so who's the our? And that's because IRC doesn't plan and manage sustainable wash services, right? We're not a utility. We're not like Cliff providing. We're not a service provider. We're not even a local government. So actually, I think a lot of what we seek, the role that we seek to play, particularly in the districts where we work, but also at national level, is actually to support our partners in being able to do this, whether that's a local government partner, whether that's a utility partner, helping them to be able to plan and adapt. And I think a lot of that comes down to the sort of stuff we're talking about here. I mean, it starts with, and it sounds often really silly, but it starts with having everybody acknowledge that there's a system there in the first place. That can be a local system, but that can also be a national system. And I think a lot of the more interesting things that we're seeing in IRC is where national level systems change cuts across some of these great planning that we might be doing with local actors. So local actors are coming up with great initiatives around community management or whatever, and suddenly national level decides, well, we're not really doing community management anymore because we're going to bring in rural utilities everywhere, right? So I think actually what Lucas is saying resonates a lot. If I think about the work that IRC does, particularly with local government partners, it's often to try to move them away from a fixation on one project or 1 year's budgeting, to take 2 steps back and think about what it is that they're trying to achieve, and to understand the full breadth of who are the other actors in that space. I may be a local government with responsibility for community provision of boreholes, but I may actually also have a national water utility operating in my district who may have much better access to finance than I'm ever going to have. So how can I engage with them and attract them to the district and work in partnership with them? So for me, this is where a lot of the tools we're talking about earlier come into play as well. Tools that help the different actors to understand the system they're part of and to see the opportunities that system offers to achieve their strategic goals.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. And did that trigger anything among Savata, Lucas, Cliff? Do you want to come in and respond to that? A nod from Savata.
Sorry, Angela, do you want us to respond to the question in the chat box? Yes, I have one question coming to me about influencing the donor, and the question is that do you think that result-based, performance-based funding might assist with this approach? And my question is yes and no. Why it's yes? It's yes if the result coming out from your result-based approach, result-based performance is somehow aligned with what being like aligned with the roadmap that you propose to the donor already. An example to this, in the case of Cambodia, instead of being able to convince Ministry of Rural Development to perform the collective action effort, which we are not successful, we able to convince the Ministry of Interior to influence this collective effort task. But the issues here that we fail to convince our donor to accept the reality that we are not able to make that Ministry of Rural Development to do that role and then the fund has been cut, and then we move on and then be able to convince another influential stakeholder, which is giving us quite a very good success and be able to exit. So that is the example. And yeah.
Great. Thank you for that, Savata. And I'm looking for signs of if you want to respond. Others, Lucas or others? It's a bit challenging to do it in my virtual world.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, so I think the question is about how do you, traditionally what you want to do is what evidence is enough for you to make change in the system, and traditional evaluation, for example, will take years to give you new information to enable you to change whatever you're trying to do. So what we have find very useful in the system is basically to try to because most of the challenges we are working are mainly the understanding about how do we deliver things at scale, and most of them is about the how. In the WASH sector, we have a lot of knowledge about the what, but how do you do that at your scale? What we have found very interesting for us is applying some process evaluation, looking at 20 processes, for example, channeling fund from national level to local government, and tracking where the blockages are. And you may find that it is just a simple communication which can unlock the time for money to flow from national level to district level. And that doesn't need you to have an evaluation for 6 months or 1 year. It's just tracking that process and bring all the people together and making that change in the process. In our payment by result program, for example, at the beginning, we had a huge problem around communicating the results to the local government. And we found that it's just the team at the Ministry of Water was not be able to process the data to send that to the local government. And once we were able to develop tools, it was very simple, and the recipient was able to trust the process. So my experience and the lesson I learned from this process is that we need a very simplified process and a constant review of the process to make changes. And they can be as a small stuff, which when are being followed up and they are tackled, can help to unlock huge constraints in the system.
Great. Thank you very much for that point, Lucas. And I think that's a great one to close this round of discussion on. There are some other important questions in the chat, so feel free to have a look, and also participants respond to one another. But I really appreciate those perspectives as well on saying, you know, maybe small amounts of adaptation or change actually have the potential to unlock something much bigger if you have the right stakeholders in the room, let's say. So thank you to our discussants, and we will be back to you shortly for the second round. So you can go ahead and switch off your cameras here and listen keenly to the next round, I think we can get the slides back up, great. Keenly to the next round of findings for another round of discussion. So this is, hopefully you're getting the feel for how we'll run this. We'll now go into a focus on what we've called here drivers of alignment on understanding. So why do people and different types of stakeholders agree or disagree? And then we will start with an audience poll to get the feel for this topic, followed by presentation of a sample of findings, a key finding, and then we'll be back for discussion. So over to you, Jeff, for the next poll.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Angela. Hope you guys are kind of getting the flow of this, and that it's fun, and that you guys are great responses from the discussants, and just this has been a really, looking at the chat and looking at the Q&A, this is awesome. Thank you all for engaging in this topic. Okay, so let's move on to the next finding, this next discussion, which relates to the drivers of stakeholder alignment on understanding with another poll. So let's go. To participate, click on the poll icon to the right, like before, in blue jeans. And the question asks, what do you think is the primary factor that drives wash service sustainability? I know this is pretty open, but just bear with us. What do you think is the primary factor that drives wash service sustainability? And you'll note that the 6 factors we have here are sort of a subset of the 17 factors we showed before in the comparison on shifts in understanding. We just chose sort of the top 3 most referenced and the bottom 3 least referenced factors to see what folks thought. So I'll give people about a minute to fill out this poll and just click one of these. I mean, you can only click one of these, but please click one. I'm personally very, very interested in seeing what comes from this. It's going to be really cool. Okay, I'll give folks about 20 more seconds. It looks like folks are thinking, and there's still more participation. Why don't I give you another 30 seconds? Very cool. So it looks like O&M and service performance and community or users are the top ones. In politics. In our study, we ended up seeing that folks didn't really want to talk about politics. So of course that didn't come up as important, but certainly, or didn't come up as influential, but certainly it is. We know that. Cool. All right, let's close the poll in about 10 seconds. Very interesting. All right, we can close the poll. Okay, wow. So again, thank you for participating in the poll. As you can see, there's a range between responses on operations and maintenance, service performance, politics, community or users. Environmental and laws and regulations didn't seem to come up as that important, at least within the 6 factors. But again, what we can sort of see here is really that there's a range in opinion and a range in understanding within our participants on what factor is the most important. But generally, yeah, you can see that, operations and maintenance sort of comes out on top, which is going to be interesting for our next for our sessions coming up on preventative maintenance, professionalized maintenance. Very interesting. Okay, so we would like to sort of contrast this poll and the findings from this poll with some overarching findings from our stakeholder understanding study, which focused also on sort of the drivers of alignment and looking at how different stakeholders seem to conceptualize the interaction of factors, different kinds of stakeholders across different contexts, to try to see what influenced their understanding on these factors, sort of what sort of contextual aspects influence their alignment on these factors. Okay, so our team was interested in comparing and contrasting, as I said, stakeholder understanding on factor interactions across the 7 SWS study regions to evaluate the drivers of alignment on systems understanding, because that's important. The research team looked at drivers such as the starting point of collaboration, network or coalition age, coalition member turnover, existence of a work plan or a strategy, of a formalized work plan or strategy, and external funding types. What our team found was that the largest driver, or the largest signal, the largest obvious driver, from what our data was showing, on stakeholder alignment on factors and their interactions was coalition member turnover. That's the one that showed the largest comparison, largest signal. So our assessment of alignment was based on variance or range in reference to the 17 study factors we showed before. And we found that manageable turnover led to a 32% increase in alignment on factors and interactions over time, or a 32% decrease in sort of range in responses between sort of the baseline and end line data. While unmanageable turnover, or coalitions with unmanageable turnover, led to a 17% decrease in alignment, or a 17% increase in range and responses over time. So this shows the significant impact coalition member turnover has on aligned understanding of local system context, where reducing turnover affords the intrinsic benefit of investing in stakeholder understanding to promote a higher likelihood of service sustainability. We look forward to seeing some of your comments to these findings, and more of this information can be seen in the flagship report. You can always ask us as well later on.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks all for the poll participation. I know it can be challenging to see just a snapshot of findings, but I appreciate those of you asking for more about methods and findings in the chat, and we'll see if we can get some of those answered. But for now, we'll come over to get some more responses and reflections from our experts. So Savata, Lucas, Cliff, and Patrick, can you please turn on your cameras again? And we'll focus in a little bit on the alignment, agreement, or disagreement among different types of actors about what's important, what should be done first, one could say. So one of the things that was emphasized in this, in the SWS project, or throughout the different implementation contexts, was a lot of multi-stakeholder engagement, meetings, coalitions, collaboration, as a way to dialogue about systems, study systems together, and come to a more shared understanding of what needs to happen to improve their performance or improve service performance. So you may want to comment on that, but I'd also like to ask if you have other experiences to share or examples about how stakeholders' alignment or agreement and disagreement about how systems function and behave can be improved or can be changed. And I think importantly, or secondly, is that alignment on systems and how they work really the end goal or beneficial? Or is it actually divergent views and disagreements that can bring value and support a stronger system and a stronger network of stakeholders? So it's a big open question, and I'd like to first go in reverse order this time. So Patrick, you're up first, and then we'll go around to Lucas, Savata, and Cliff. And again, I'm keeping an eye for additional perspectives. They don't need to be questions in the chat. And if you'd really like to take the mic and provide maybe an example or your experience, whether it's from SWS or somewhere else, feel free to raise your hand. Over to you, Patrick.
Great, thanks, Angela. So, I mean, I love systems. I think lots of the folks on this call love systems, and we think of ourselves as systems nerds, and I love complexity. But, you know, I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate over time, and is now, you know, increasingly strongly held opinion of mine and other colleagues at IRC, is that actually the complexity of the rural water and sanitation sector is a sign of its weakness. It's a sign of its that it's not developed. The fact that you find 10 different service delivery models in one rural district, the fact that there's no agreement on critical issues like asset ownership, the fact that it's unclear where end responsibility shifts, the fact that anyone can start a wash business tomorrow and set themselves up, and that they're not regulated, and that nobody is looking at the quality of the service. All right. So I think sometimes I have to put my enjoyment of researching and understanding systems and complexity to one side, and then pose the question of what is it that we're trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve, or certainly what IRC is trying to achieve, but I think all of us, is ensuring that people have access to water and sanitation services that last. So actually, I think that one of the biggest understandings we get from all this research is that we need to support governments in simplifying the systems, in professionalizing the systems, in making choices. We're going left or we're going right. It's public or it's private, or we're going to have strong regulation and private delivery. These sort of some of these bigger questions. And frankly, to me, that's also a challenge from some of the very local work we do. IRC works very locally. We all work very locally. But the danger, I think, of overinvestment in ever deepening understanding of the current system, which is often failing at the local level, if it's divorced from this message of the need to simplify, to learn, and then to simplify and to scale to a reduced set of models for service delivery that everybody agrees on, is that it becomes a sort of anthropological exercise, and we lovingly describe and describe and describe, and we never come to decision points. One thing that we found that does help and that's again at the micro level, at the district level, is these master plans. It's not that the master plan as an expression of political will, the master plan that gets and again, let's be clear, we see a clear leader for this, which is local government, puts local government at the center, and has local government go out into its district and say, well, what is it that we have now? What level of service is that providing? And what is the level of service that we want to provide in the future? That artifact, that master plan, provides a very clear organizing principle for other stakeholders to align around. But I think what's much more, I use that word artifact purposefully, because actually what's much more important than the artifact of a master plan is a local government, or indeed a national government, that actually commits to achieving these goals. Nothing, I think, is more powerful in reducing complexity than somebody deciding that they have a vision and that they're going to lead. And again, that should be a very uncontroversial thing to say, but I think sometimes, again, in the joy that we take in facilitating everybody and making sure that everybody has a voice at the table, that's great. But the danger of that is that it actually lets people who should be accountable for providing services off the hook, because, hey, we're all sitting at the table, we're all trying to engage with the problem. But no, actually, it's your job You were elected to make sure these are provided, and you, Mr. Service Provider, are being paid to make sure these are provided. So you have a fundamentally different level of accountability in this than a citizen who is electing you or paying you to provide those services. So just a couple of reflections. But for me, overall, let's make it our aim that we're going to reduce the complexity in the sector a little bit.
Thank you, Patrick. Lucas.
Yes, thank you. So for me, the issue about alignment is very important, especially for the water sector where you have many stakeholders who are there with different interests. So let us be sincere with ourselves that I think my experience shows that I think majority of the investment which are going to they do promote misalignment of incentives. So, for example, I would say in Tanzania, for example, about 90% of our funding here is on new infrastructure construction. So if 90% of your funding is going to build a new infrastructure, what are you expecting? People will follow the money where the money flows. Politicians will want to spend the money. They are making progress. They are building complex infrastructure. And the civil servant would want to show the politician that they are doing their job by building very good infrastructure. So what happens is that all the discussion in the sector is about building infrastructure because all the resources are flowing toward building infrastructure. Now, no one will be able to talk about maintaining and sustaining services because there is no money actually going in that direction. Similarly, when we talk about sanitation, if you look at the funding and financing, all the money in the sector is going for water supply. I think you cannot expect any politician to talk about sanitation because there is no money. And even civil servant, why should they care about sanitation? Because there is nothing to do on it because there is no funding. The government and donors are not allocating funding for that. So my point here is that if we want to have alignment with stakeholders, we need to align incentives. And I think we have to be very sincere that people follow money, and we have to be very clear about where money goes and where is money going to pay for what. And once you do that, at least the shift of focus and discussion will shift toward those important things which you want to discuss. So I will give an example here in Tanzania. So as I said, by just giving about £80 million on sustainability and maintaining water infrastructure, we saw district council planning and allocating funding for maintenance. We saw their budgeting, at least planning going toward maintenance. We have evidence showing the interaction between district councils and the communities on maintenance issues. Why is that happening? Because the money is flowing toward that direction, and there is no any excuse for people not to start to talk about that. Now, once you align the incentive, now you can start to ask, okay, now where are you going to spend your money? You say, okay, because you don't have data. So then they start talking about, okay, we have to collect a lot of data. So data become the driver, money become a trigger. And that, it means, because there is money, politicians will start asking, where are you spending your money? Because they have to account. That brings accountability and transparency and the political will in the system. Okay? And then you have all other processes which are coming out of that. So you will see that by focusing on creating an enabling environment. So we start by creating an enabling environment. So money creating an enabling environment, the incentive brings every stakeholders to focus on addressing certain issues. That brings political will, data starting to flow, accountability start to come, and transparency in the system start to come. And then because you are focusing on results, you will be starting to bring some verification in it. And then they will say, these results are not reflecting what is going on the ground. You say, okay, it's in there. And then you start to address systemic issues around monitoring, MOND, and everything. So for me, alignment, we have to understand the system, as Patrick is saying. We have to understand the incentives of different people in the system and try to see how do we align the incentive of everybody to focus on the things which matters, be it politician, be it NGO, be it donors and everybody. So I will end there, but that is my quick reflection of what is happening and how you can tackle that on the ground.
Thank you so much, Lucas, and great to hear that shift. I think for alignment of perspectives and ideas is great, but what you really need to pursue is alignment of incentives and financial flows, get the right actions and the right behaviors taking place, the right decisions made. And from Patrick as well, is it alignment of perspectives or clarity on the truth, which is who is accountable for what, how much it costs, and who's responsible for paying for it. So great additions there, which already start to give us a taste of finding 3, I think. And over to you, Savata. I'm confident you have something to add to this one.
Thank you. I love the 2 points that mentioned by the previous guest speaker. And I will add Cambodia example to Lucas' point of alignment, the incentive in my next question. But to me, talking about alignment, the thinking, I would go differently. That I love the disagreement, because having the disagreement, it can be the critical discussion and then leading into further development of the whole program. Because if 2 people agree on certain things all the time, there are probably an issue. Either one person do not think critically about the issues, or that person was just hypocrite. So I wish that we have more disagreement and then discuss things out. So responding to the question, alignment of the thinking alone is not the end goal, but alignment to the goal, to align the main goal. Why do we want? What do we want? What is the success look like in water and sanitation better services? So what is success look like? It simplifies what, like Patrick was mentioning, who is doing what, how are we going to do it, what is the time frame? And then we also align the way of our working. Way of working is somehow not somehow very important, it's super important. Why? It's become a norm this day that NGOs are competing against each other, reputation against each other in front of the donor is a norm of various organizations. We have to admit that this happened. And it's not only NGO, government counterparts are doing something similar, showing off so that they get some incentive divided. Second, in order to also reach to the point of alignment, the thinking, it's required that we look for the genuine convening power. And it has to be a real, genuine power or person to influence the whole collective action effort. Or otherwise, it would just the fake or hypocrite discussion in order to get the donor per diem fund or a visit to other countries, just like different way of drive. Last but not least, it's about building the champion and recognize the champion. And that's part of what Lucas was mentioning earlier, that defining the incentive among each stakeholder, including NGO, donor, government stakeholder, implementer, at the grassroots level. So and find that champion and recognize the great work of that champion, and especially the politicians. And we discuss about this in the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Savata. Great points, and we're seeing lots of buzzing agreement in the chats here. So Cliff, last but not least, I want to ask you to weigh in on this one. And I know you have a couple hats as a researcher, but also working as a service provider. How do you see this alignment, and whether also the incentives are in place to encourage good performance? Over to you.
Yeah, without repeating what has already been said, I think what we've seen from our work in Kitui is that first, I think you need a platform that allows you to bring together the different groups that are working in the sector to already start having a conversation. Without that, then the transaction costs of even bending the systems thinking become too high for any partner to bear. So for Kitui, we were lucky to find a very young NASET Kitui Watch Forum, which had already begun on this quarterly meeting frequency. And the idea was to meet and debate sector issues. It was not very organized, but at least it provided a platform to start to engage. And through that platform, then we were able to start instilling that systems mindset. Basically trying to feed it with a lot of information in pieces of a period of time, so that they can digest, they can debate in an open and free environment. And with time, then people start seeing the low-hanging fruits. I would, for instance, give the example of the last Watch Forum meeting, when after 2, 3, 4 years of support, then you start hearing stakeholders hold each other into account, asking, why are you taking this approach to implementation of your programming when we've already discussed this and we've seen that it doesn't quite work. So you need that platform that convinces people and that works towards a certain vision. So visioning is also a key part of this, because without that, then you have a lot of politics, emotions, anecdotal proposals coming to the table. And because everyone holds an equal vote, then you're obliged to listen and to perhaps, I guess, respect. So I think the other key important piece to this is evidence. So the way to counter politics, the way to counter those influences that do not necessarily take the discussion or the debate or understanding forward, is to make sure that then you're also feeding a lot of evidence on where actually the issues are. When we started working in Kitui, there was a very strong infrastructure development signal, which could not have been countered by anything else other than evidence. So going out there and conducting an audit of every single Runo water point in the county, more than 3,000 of them, and trying to show the issues. And actually, from discussing the findings and from that work, the Watch Forum, of a period of time, probably 2 years, then you start seeing people shift mindset. You start seeing people say it's probably cheaper to invest here and not on this other side. You start seeing people say we have a policy gap here, and that is healthy discussion, which worked very well. From a service provider point of view, I think also being able to showcase how some of these issues could be resolved by having an operation or maintenance service provider going out there to fix things. Not to say that it's perfect, but with results, if breakdowns are being fixed within 3 days to 5 days, then that's already way better than more than a month that it takes communities to fix things. So I think being able to show projects and how things could be done alternatively, and sharing that information and feeding it to the coalition or to the local group of stakeholders, that's also key in aligning thinking. In fact, we embraced an open book policy where we basically analyze our operational data and we show it on a PowerPoint presentation to put it out there, because there's nothing to hide. If we don't do that, then the enabling environment will not come out of this group. I'll end by saying that I think divergent views are very healthy and very key. In fact, wearing my SWS hat, what we did was to feed the evidence and then take a back seat to let the people consume the evidence and the data, and then come to an agreement as to what priorities are. So I think divergent views are very healthy, and they help to make sure that then every stone is turned in the process of setting up the priorities within the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Cliff. And that brings us to the end of this round of discussion. Just to recap a bit, I've understood that, maybe a certain amount of shared understanding, a certain amount of agreement that this is a system, it requires more than just infrastructure, is a sort of necessary starting point to enable any degree of, this shared work, shared progress, shared vision, and to unlock some of those even divergent perspectives, as you say, Cliff, to bring them to the table as well. But from there, I'm also hearing it's important to take that next step quickly of saying, so where can things be shifted? Looking at incentives, identifying leverage points to start to shift things. And just a comment about, how to take this systems thinking and this systems learning forward. From the chat, can systems thinking inform us when funding and incentives are aligned, or when they are partially or fully decoupled? Maybe understanding these incentives better is critical, so they can be more helpfully aligned, as Lucas was also suggesting. And a point from Harold Blockwood, so a teaser for the session coming up this upcoming Monday, was that incentives and additionally trust between different stakeholders was found to be a really key factor in establishing professionalized maintenance. So join on Monday for more on that. But I think this discussion has set us up well for the third and final, after which we'll first start with a poll, hear that finding, and then we'll have a last brief round of discussion. So thanks all, and keep it going in the chat. Over to you, Jeff.
Or Rich in this case.
Rich, excuse me.
No problem. Thanks, Angela. And thanks, discussants, for the great discussion, and participants for so many good points in the chat as well, and good questions. I will reiterate something Angela just says to quickly plug that a lot of the discussion in the chat has been a great preview for next week's sessions, both the one on professionalized maintenance on Monday and the one on collective action on Wednesday. And as Angela noted, it's also a good lead in to our third finding for today: whose understanding counts. So we'll start with a poll. We could go to the next slide. The question asks, which group is most in need of shifting their understanding of the system over time? So please just select which group you think and click submit to let us know your opinion. We'll give you about a minute to fill out the poll. I know this might be a tough decision for some people. There's a lot of good choices there. We're getting responses here. Give you a couple more seconds. Take a look and see which group you think is most in need of shifting their understanding of the system over time. like we're pretty much peaked on our responses, so maybe we can close that out. So thanks for participating in the poll. It does look like a lot more emphasis on the local. We've got local or regional government at the top and national government behind that. But also seeing the internationals coming up closely behind national government. So that's interesting and good to see. So there really is no right answer to the question. It's an important discussion to have, and that's part of what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. So when resources are limited, obviously, as they are in most projects, we have to prioritize where to focus our efforts and the purpose, who we're going to really need to influence or how we're going to increase understanding over time. So this will take us back for a moment here. We'll go back to the theory of change presented at the beginning of this session. This looks slightly different than the way we presented it before, but you can see the main pathway here that hypothesized that if actors better understood the system and their role in it, they would more effectively and collectively identify needs and priorities, and that would lead to more effective planning and improving the system. So did this hypothesis hold up? In many ways it did. It was certainly part of the picture, but we also found that in order to have permission and space to operate, and in order to enact genuine systems change or system level changes, some stakeholders had more power to influence than others did. And I think this really gets quite a bit to a lot of the discussion that we were just having around the politics here. So we've observed that policies, finance, and sector investment strategies also have a major influence on local systems. And many of the big decisions that are being made are political ones. So the original pathway identified in the theory of change is important, but a critical second pathway involved influencing government decision makers or getting buy-in from other actors who have the power to enact shifts. So even in the cases where we were defining our system boundary at a fairly local level, for example, at the district level or town level, many of the biggest and most impactful decisions, both good and bad, were being made outside of that project focus area, outside of that boundary. Local actors and local efforts are essential, given that many of the service delivery and authority functions are delegated there. But there is a limit to what a single district or service provider or other organization can change on their own. Some constraints, including financial resources, legal frameworks, can only be solved through engagement with institutions and actors working at a higher level, such as the regional authorities, national government, or international donors, international NGOs. And we've often assumed that having data and evidence will drive decision-making. I think we've been proven wrong in the United States quite a bit recently on various topics, and we saw that we keep falling short on that assumption in our work as well. And so was greater systems understanding really the barrier to government prioritization of water, sanitation, and hygiene? So our evidence-based approach really needed to be adapted to accommodate a more sophisticated advocacy agenda, stakeholder behavior change, and collaborative decision-making. The tweet that we are showing here shares a quote from a discussion that we had during our 2018 SWS team meeting. It says, "Decisions are driven by emotions, relationships, and ego," according to Watershed, one of our partners. So how do we combine evidence-based advocacy and relationship building to strengthen WASH systems? The collective action findings that will be discussed on Wednesday's session have a lot to say about collaborative processes for decision-making and relationships, but we've also seen that network analysis is a powerful tool for this. Under SWS, it was used to identify stakeholders with the most formal or informal influence to engage in advocacy or to for the activity to work with on understanding the system and the complexity of the problem. Also, the network analysis results and the network diagrams were found to be very useful to spark meaningful conversation with stakeholders on things like power dynamics, constraints, coordination, or actions that they can take as a group. So this leads us into our third discussion around whose understanding counts.
Great, thank you, Rich. And our discussants can turn on their cameras again for this last round of discussion. And as you see, we've shifted the focus a little bit, also thinking about leverage points and not only understanding systems, but triggering change, as came up already in the previous discussion. But certainly, as many have mentioned in the questions in the chat, it does cost resources to study systems and to engage and to continue to, let's say, build understanding, understand how the network works, identify leverage points. And so the first kind of prompt here is just around when those resources are put in, where are these efforts best placed to create the most change? I've seen some varying answers in the poll. And secondly, we may want to focus on the finding around politicians and their key role, politicians and decision makers, let's say. How can WASH experts, which I see many on the call, I think are on the technical side of WASH service delivery, become more adept at influencing them, more than just evidence, but being able to push at those incentives, get those incentives in place, and also probe for different decisions. So with that, I will open the floor. I think for this final round, we'll do ladies first. So I'll ask you to respond first, Savata, then Lucas, Cliff, and Patrick. And you're welcome to respond to these prompts, or if you want to build up something that was said earlier, feel free.
Thank you, Angela. About where the resource should be put in order to most change in the system, I think other guest speaker probably can have better sayings on that. But I'd rather go to the point mentioning about if politicians are highly influential and whether or not the evidence are needed in order to do that. And my strong confirmation that politicians are really the right stakeholder to engage in order to influence the whole system and influence in order to convince the whole system change. And given the example where watershed are working in Cambodia, that when we just started the market-based sanitation in Cambodia, we use local politicians, or we can say local government stakeholder, which is a village chief or commune councillor, to be our sales agent. So they are our initial sales agent, and in the future we also successful of having we convince the politicians from the national level in order to replicate our leadership training, which is the Ministry of Interior. And how did we do that? First, we use the right evidence to prove that the approach is working. So the right evidence here will have to balance the. Let me say this differently. The right evidence here will have to be the evidence that show that it helped them to increase their reputation, government reputation, both sub-national level and the national level. And we, as the donor or as the implementer, we also need to set aside the budget where those government stakeholders can do their own research or evidence, create their own evidence, meaning that using their own team to conduct the research. Because government counterpart like national government like Ministry of Interior, they won't believe us easily whether or not our evidence is the right evidence from a third party or another key stakeholder. So we have to set aside the budget where they can do their own research and to prove that this is the right thing. Third is something that Lucas was mentioning earlier about aligning the incentive among the stakeholder. And with this, for watershed, we use certain strategy to align that incentive. First of all, we make sure that our program aligns with their work plan and their strategy. Second, we need to make sure that EWOL term, we need to make sure that our program will help him or her to claim that he or she is doing a great job in their own mandate, in their own political platform, and it helps him or her to win in the next election. If that responds to that incentive, then yes, that becomes a genuine way of working. They would make sure that related stakeholder will create a work plan starting from sub-national level to the national level. The budget will be set. Everything will be set aside if it helps him or her to win the next election. The recognition from sub-national level until the national level will have to be ready, available, in place where each individual who involved, each politician who get involved into this change can be recognized by another bigger, higher level politician that he or she did the best job in that, improving the service 1, 2, 3. And that is why he or she, the boss could recommend that specific strategy into the government system. And that we reach the stage that we get their approval.
Great. Thank you, Savata, and great points on recalling the real constraints of politicians. The most dedicated politician who's committed to making change can only do that if they're elected. So it's understanding what they need to do and what kind of information is needed, but also recognizing that, if I can interpret our as non-government entities working within national and country systems, to know that our or external evidence and monitoring is maybe not the information or not the evidence needed to influence country level decisions. I think that points also to where can resources be placed in national and local monitoring systems, which have the credibility and the legitimacy to provide evidence for decisions. So thank you for that. The good thumbs up. Hope I've heard you well. Over to you, Lucas. I think this will be our kind of final round on this.
Yes. So for me, how do we engage a politician? So one of the reflections from my side has been we have to acknowledge that we have been very poor at engaging in politics. So traditionally, this sector is engineering dominated sector. Politics is not the way many people think. Politics is not our thing, and we need to do that. So one of the big reflections from my side is about we have to get better at managing politics, managing politicians. At the moment, we are doing very bad on that. We have been at the end receiving orders from politicians, but what they want to do is, instead of us managing them, influencing them, and shaping the agenda about what should be discussed where and how. So, for example, we have a minister here who likes to go in the villages inaugurating huge infrastructure. So he's the one who basically say, tomorrow I want to go here, tomorrow I want to go there, tomorrow, because he want to be seen. But I think what we have done, what the government has done, some of the stuff here, you can still arrange the same field visit for him to look at the service provision alongside infrastructure and change the conversation around that. So that's one. Another issue which I want to flag is about the context. I think the context matters a lot. So for example, in Tanzania, it's a socialist country, Ujamaa, and people here are very loyal to government. And accountability is more, so civil servants basically report upward, they respond to what politicians want. And in this setting, there is no way you can achieve anything if you don't work from the top. That's how it is. So I will give an example in terms of how we have been able to do that on the National Sanitation Campaign, which we are supporting. So 4 years ago, we were told that politicians don't like sanitation and they will never talk about sanitation. But I think it's because all the initiatives here were driven from the bottom. So people were engaging communities there, but then there's no enforcement and there's no huge mobilization of communities. So what we did with our national campaign here is we engaged the politicians at the top. And what we did is very simple. We know that these guys, they like to be seen that they are doing their job very well. So what we did is say, actually, we give you a lot of media attention for you to be seen that you are doing your job on the ground. Because they like to be in the TV and the radio every day talking about what they have been able to do and that this is our achievement. So through our mass media campaign, what we did, we started with soliciting commitment from the top. And it's just very simple. Just go to the regional commissioner, give him a press conference, let him talk about what he's doing there, and let him commit that he's going to do something. At the beginning, we didn't tell them what are we going to do with that commitment. And then you put all those communications in the national TV and national radio. Once they are there, they'll just be calling us that you are doing a very good job because we have been able to be seen in the national TV and radio doing a very good job. But for us, that was a methodology for us to capture the commitment for them to do something on the ground. And now, when we went back to them and say, you committed this. We need to tell you need to tell us where are you with this implementation. And we show a lot of changes. There is the civil servant for data and information, and for them to take action. Because the commitment is already in social media, the commitment is already in the TV, and we were using to amplify those commitments. So again, we're coming back to understanding the politicians and what they want. These guys, they want to be seen. These guys, they want to be seen that they are doing a very good job. But also, what we did, we didn't brand anything about UKAID. So that this initiative is seen as its government-owned initiative. So in our national campaign here, we have never branded anything about UKAID, and we have been at the back supporting their initiative and leaving them to claim that all their achievement is on their own. That's fine. That's fine, which is very difficult for many donors to say we don't put our logo, we don't put our brand, we don't communicate. But if you want to work with government and influencing politicians, put them at the front seat. Let them drive the agenda. Support them with their initiative. Make them see that they are doing their job very, very well. And through that, you gain trust, and you can discuss very difficult issues, and they can change the system. So for me, those are the issues that we need to be better at managing politics. We need to understand these guys engage in them proactively. Don't let them manage you. And I think you can see a lot of changes in the system.
Thank you, Lucas, for an inspiring example of increasing the political literacy of our sector. So great examples there. And I did see another question in the chat regarding experience of experts on the call, participants on the call with opposition politics and engaging with opposition politicians. I don't know if I think we won't have time to take experiences on that, but another good question you may want to check in the chat. So thank you very much. And we have just a few minutes left. So I'll ask Cliff and then Patrick to share your final remark. And to enable us to keep on time, I ask you, if possible, to keep it concise. I've appreciated the good examples, but if you can take just a couple of minutes each, that will wrap up this discussion. So over to you, Cliff.
Thank you. So I think resources should essentially follow mandates. In this context, mandates for WASH services delivery. That's because the government is ultimately responsible for providing services to the public. Anyone else working in the sector works to support government. That being said, what we've seen from our work in Kenya is that many of the governments are still young and at times lack capacity. And as you work to strengthen government, then you also want to be working through local partners to change their behaviors. So local stakeholders to change their practices and behavior. For instance, in Kitui, NGOs are the second biggest investors in water infrastructure. So, I mean, as we work to support government to embrace systems change and service delivery approaches, you're not going to achieve that, especially if they have weak capacity and if you still have NGOs not changing their practices. So, I mean, in summary, I think you want to also, within those mandates, within those jurisdiction areas, you want to work through the stakeholders that are supporting government to deliver on its role. So for NGOs, you want them to focus on access, on alternative approaches to service delivery. Doesn't have to be infrastructure. It could be O&M, it could be professionalized maintenance, it could be a focus on results-based payments. And that also links with donors' priorities, given that they also fund a significant part of the sector, provide a significant part of the sector funding. You need the communities as well, because without understanding why they need to pay for the service, then services are not going to be sustainable. You still need that tariff contribution from users. On politicians, I would say we've had challenges like everyone else. And I think Lucas has good tricks on how to leverage their support. What we've seen throughout our work in Kenya is that they were almost absent in the system. When we did the ONA, when we called them for events, the incentives were not right. And I think there is further work to be done there. What we saw is that they tend to focus a lot more on the short-term cycle, because every 5 years there's an election. Then it's short-term projects that allow them to get those funds quickly. There's also a very strong infrastructure component, cutting ribbons, which Lucas has mentioned. There was also a very strong equality aspect. So we were demonstrating a maintenance model in one of the 8 sub-regions of Kitui. And if we were to go to the politicians, or when we engage politicians, then we were seeing support from that one region out of 8. So the other 8 want equal treatment. So again, balancing incentives here and trying to see how to meet that can be challenging, especially when you're in a demonstration phase. The closing remark from my end is there's still, I think, an opportunity for future learning programs to explore how WASH systems can influence the political circles or the political group, so that we can be able to do that better as a sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff. Last remark to you, Patrick.
Great, thanks, Angela, and thanks, Savata and Lucas and Cliff. I thought that was this session's really, this last question's really great. I mean, look, go back to your question, Angela. Whose opinion counts? Local and national actors' opinions. My opinion doesn't count. Okay? Jane and Martin's opinion counts. Lucas's opinions count. My opinion's really not terribly relevant, and I think that's super important for a project like this to bear in mind. You know, you don't drive change, and you don't, in systems, you don't build strong systems through external actors. Change has to be, we can support, we can help, we can try and do whatever we do, but the change has to be locally owned and locally driven by people who are passionate and people who are champions. Where to put the influence in understanding the system? Wherever it needs to be put. And I know, and again, this is very hard, I think, for those of us, people coming out of a rational engineering mindset, people like me with the sort of training we have. Systems change is an art, it's not a science. All of these tools can help us. Network analyses, power analyses, building block analyses, all of that can help. But that's not what drives change. What drives change is people like the people we're listening to who are deeply embedded in the system, who are using all of those tools to understand it, who are working at the local level, but also working at the national level, who see that there's an opportunity here because there's a minister who's ambitious and would like to be forward, and they help to write a speech for that minister and they get them into the right place. That's, I think, what makes system change happen and real, and it takes time to do. So, and above all, it's political. Every single bit of it's political. It's political even when we're not talking to the politicians, you know, because frankly, a technocratic minister or a chief director or whatever, they're all political people too. It's about incentives. I think Lucas said it right back at the start, you know, everybody who we're working with, they're human beings and their interactions with each other are political. So yes, of course, evidence plays a role in that, but so does relationships. So does getting to know people. So does being the spider in the web and bridging the gap. And above all, I think it's about being passionate about and committed to a vision of change, and having the courage to play a systems leadership role in driving that change forward, which often means that you seek to be almost invisible because you're constantly trying to put that politician or that chief executive or whoever in the spotlight and to bring them on board into your coalition for change. So I think, yeah, that's it. Thanks very much. It's all about you. It's all about you, national, local champions.
Thank you very much, Patrick, Cliff, Savata, and Lucas for those great final remarks. I'm seeing a lot of +1s, and I really appreciate it. And in true form of the learning partnership, I've really appreciated having new perspectives and expertise coming in to help us all learn, even during this session. So thanks all, and I will pass the mic to Brittany, who can point us to some more resources and next steps.
Great, thanks, Angela. So I will just walk us through a few more slides here, and I promise to end promptly on time. We can go ahead and advance the slide. So before we let you go, I want to highlight just a few of our products so you can learn more about the tools and methods discussed today. We do have 2 flagship reports that have been heavily referenced in the chat and Q&A. The first is an assessment of shifts in stakeholder understanding of WASH systems, which shares findings from a rigorous study exploring how stakeholder understanding of water and sanitation services shifted over our 5-year project duration. The flagship report, Using Social Network Analysis and WASH Programs, shares cross-case learning from applying SNA in 4 SWS countries: Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and Cambodia. Measuring Systems Change in WASH Programming provides a guide to the practical application of outcome mapping and sustainability scorecards. And finally, the IRC Symposium paper, Whose Understanding Counts, was a direct inspiration for part of this session. And I do also want to let you know that IRC has a forthcoming flagship report that outlines their approach for driving local systems change. This is expected to be published in October, so stay tuned. Okay, so we hope you will enjoy us next Monday for our second deep dive session on professionalizing rural water services. We'll share what we learned about efforts to strengthen and professionalize maintenance provision across SWS and discuss what it takes to build a system for professionalized maintenance. If you're not already registered for this session, we'll drop the link to our event page in the chat. Finally, last slide, I want to thank Jeff, Angela, and Rich for organizing this session. We've listed their email addresses on this slide if you would like to get in touch. I also want to thank our wonderful panelists, Patrick, Savatha, Lucas, and Cliff, for the lively fishbowl discussion, and all of our attendees for your thoughtful questions and engagement over the last 2 hours. This brings us to the end of today's session. We have 3 exciting sessions lined up next week, so we hope to see you there, but goodbye for now.